So I have been very interested to get you on the Ethics Experts. I am on this employer branding kick, and I appreciate you making some time for us today.
My pleasure. It's really lovely to be on.
So why don't we just jump in? Why don't you start by kind of telling us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into this game?
Sure, I like that it's a game. It does feel like it sometimes. A lot of
Hmm.
ducking and weaving and adapting and shifting. So my background was I was in, I guess, regular branding and marketing for big global brands for over a decade. And I just got a little bit sick of selling shoes and vodka. And I was sort of looking for a way, I guess, to apply my talents a little bit more meaningfully. Booking.com was one of my big clients at the time, and I was really interested in their culture. I'd been to the offices a few times, had a really interesting vibe, and I'd also had a big burnout myself previously in my career. Spent sort of 6 months traveling South America and recovering from some pretty intense ad agency life burnout.
Yeah.
So I was already interested in people and culture and just the sort of effects, I guess, that a negative environment can have on you. And this role came up at Booking, and they said, well, it's about employer branding. And I didn't really know what that was at the time. And the more I looked into it, I thought, actually, this is a perfect synergy of people and culture and bringing some meaning into the workplace and all of the branding expertise I had. So I sort of leapt in very blindly, as it were, and kind of defined the role as I went, because I'd never really had anyone in that role before. Actually, that's not true. They had someone in a similar role, quite talent acquisition focused. And the way I wanted to take the role was more holistic. So I was trying to carve out, I guess, this space in a very grey zone area that sat within the talent acquisition department, but was really bled into other areas. So started working with the D&I team there, for example, quite closely, and with the PR team as well, and the marketing team, and trying to create these connections across the business. So I guess it's a little bit about me. I was there for 2.5 years building that global team out. So there's about 17,000 employees and counting at Booking. I was there for about 2.5 years. I felt like I did quite a lot within that space of time. I was used to the fast pace of the ad world. So then going client side, I tried to emulate that pace, much to the horror sometimes of the team I was working with. And I decided I was really interested in this topic of employer brand, and I was already speaking to loads of people in the industry, talking about it all the time. And I just thought I'd really like to consult and see where this goes and see how many other clients and brands I can work with to do something similar. So now here I am. I've been working as a consultant for about 7, 8 months now, going pretty well.
Wow.
Also quite interesting shift now. My business was going very well. Now we're seeing how it pans out. But actually I'm having some really interesting discussions with clients at the moment. So it's not necessarily a bad time to be in employer branding.
You think it's not a bad time? Is that what you said?
I think the industry is nervous. I think clients have gone one of two ways. They've either gone radio silent because they are not hiring at the moment, or they've seen the value of their employer brand team and put them to work elsewhere. And actually, this could be a great opportunity for employer brand professionals to expand their remit and really talk about inside out culture, because that's everything now. So I guess it depends where you sat in the employer brand spectrum. And I guess it depends how used to having those wider conversations you are.
So why don't we kind of talk about this employer brand spectrum? Because I think a lot of people maybe have heard this term and they kind of think they know what it is, but obviously when you're in it, you understand sort of the nuance of it. And you used a couple of terms just in the last sort of couple of sentences that I'd love for you to just kind of give us some more picture of what that nuanced spectrum actually looks like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it is a space that is being defined differently by everyone that speaks about it. For me, it's about the give get. It's about defining who you are as an employer to potential talent that you want to attract and keep. But it's a mutual promise. So it's what they offer to give in return for what you offer effectively, and what you offer in return for what they want to give. So in the best case scenario, it's a two-way street, and there is some equity in that exchange. So it feels like you're getting good value, and that doesn't just mean financially, of course, it means in terms of what the company offers more broadly, which is even more relevant now. Of course, people want to see what I guess value an employer brings in terms of support, in terms of additional benefits, in terms of mental health support. That breadth and spectrum, I think, of the offer has become more significant now. So I guess when I think about where employer brand, how it sits in that picture, I think it should encompass all of that promise. Now, the brand part for me is how you communicate that. But I think with communications, if you're doing branding and communications well, your research into what you should be communicating should also shape and inform the strategy of what's being created. So I do see employer brand playing a wider strategic role in helping the organization to think about how it wants to shift in those areas as well. That doesn't mean you necessarily implement all of that. Of course, you have an L&D team, you have a D&I team potentially, you have other teams within the business, within the HR sphere who are executing a lot of that. But I think employer brand has a role to play in saying, this is what the talent marketplace are looking for, this is what they expect, and this is where we should be. So I think they play a role in the strategy of how you define yourself, and therefore the strategy, or actually the strategy of what you actually are and do, has to be a part of that.
So you said something that I think is linked to this, which is inside out culture. What does that mean?
Well, it's very evident at the moment, I think, that there is no such thing as this invisible line between what's happening inside an organization and what's happening outside an organization. And I think potentially up till this minute, actually, there has been this, I guess, perception by employers that if they send out an internal memo or they make a process change, or the reality of what happens inside an organization isn't as good as what's promised in their TA marketing, then that's not a huge problem. And I think what we're seeing now, especially with COVID crisis, first time I've mentioned it, and we're about 15 minutes in, so we're doing okay.
I know, I had a little bet going how long it would take.
Well, I think inside out culture has always been true, but I think it's become more relevant because employees are talking, they're sat at home, they're online, they're seeing what other employers are doing. For the first time in a very long time, at scale, the press is talking about how employers are treating employees. And I think that's been trending actually before this crisis. So you saw scandals like Google walkouts and exposés of what life is like to work in an Amazon factory. The bigger brands have always got picked up, and they're always going to have to be squeaky clean, or there will be stories like that come from the inside but are very quickly exposed outside. But I think now, increasingly, employers' treatment of employees is being scrutinized. Those stories are being picked up much more broadly than just the big tech companies that the media is, interested in. It's everyone from delivery companies to restaurant chains. This has become mainstream news. And actually, that's something that employer branding experts have been talking about for a very long time, is this idea that we are becoming so transparent as organizations that you're no longer going to be able to hide. And I think now that's just been amplified and expedited in a way that I guess no one was expecting.
Yeah, this pandemic one, as some people are calling it, has kind of accelerated forward some of the claims and predictions that people like you have been making. It's laid bare this erasure of this sort of internal external line, and it's kind of an interesting thing. This is a great accelerant in a lot of different areas, in a risk area, in a sort of resiliency area. How much do we pay for resiliency as a business, as a business leader? And then also, I think from a branding perspective, you said something kind of interesting, and I was thinking about how you were talking about, these big brands, they got to be squeaky clean. And there's now this expectation, though, from an employer branding perspective, even if people don't have a name for it, there's an expectation that, well, why can't my employer take care of me like these other people are? And I think it kind of comes down to the fact that communication is free. So whether you're a big company and you have the money for ping pong tables and kombucha taps in the break room, or you're a small company who doesn't have those resources and is really running on a tight budget, you can still have a heart, you can still have a culture, you can still have an authentic communication to your people to let them know that you care about them. And I think that is, to your point from before, that plays a much bigger role now in that balance of an offer, as you said, or the balance of the quote unquote compensation that an employee gets, which obviously expands beyond the check that's deposited into their bank account every couple of weeks. It's the whole experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think we will be changed by this experience. I do think people who've experienced being furloughed or being let go in this crisis or being treated badly by an employer, I think they will think twice and ask more questions of their next employer. They will ask,
Right.
what you did in that circumstance, and they will ask, what will you do if this happens, and what is your policy in this area? And I think, for too long there's been this, I guess, more transactional relationship, and this forces a very different relationship between employee and employer. It forces you to be more connected to the humanity of your employees and to really understand that they are people first. We talk about this kind of separation of who you are at work and who you are at home. Those boundaries have been completely eroded. And I think employers are struggling with things they've just not had to struggle with before. I think there's been a lot of talk as well about things like D&I being deprioritized, and learning and development, diversity and inclusion, things that are, big agenda items for a lot of brands. We're now in survival mode, but actually those things become even more prevalent, because if you didn't have a really strong D&I policy before, you'll see that one blanket approach for all of your employees now in this situation is not going to work, because everyone has completely different needs based on their individual circumstances. So it's getting much more complicated for employers, unfortunately, but it does force them to consider all of these policies and to consider things that maybe weren't in place before, and now to see the importance and the need for them beyond just lip service or beyond just a talent attraction campaign.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for people to put some of these things in place. And I get what you're saying, that, we're in survival mode for many of these sort of, things that were agenda items before. And now it's like, I don't have time for that. But I think there's an opportunity to ramp some of these things up. And you said something that I've been kind of thinking about in the back of my head, where we're talking about this line between internal and external branding. We're talking about advertising externally and sort of advertising internally with respect to trying to find employees. And there's this shift toward authenticity. And I don't know if it's a generational thing or if it's just sort of this is the age that we're in type of a thing. But you really hit the nail on the head, I think, when you said that this line between who we are at home and who we are at work is kind of dissolving. And it's kind of blatantly dissolving because so many people are working from home. You know what I'm saying? Like your kids are jumping in, or your cat's crawling across the Zoom meeting, or all these other things that you get this glimpse of, where people are actually at. Like I see, your office right now, and you see my evil lair, okay? But my point is, there's like a tearing away of the unessential or the inessential, and it's a tearing away down to like the raw, authentic sort of core of what all this is. And you're seeing the core of a company, and you're seeing what they actually care about. You see these stories of, there's this big, program that our government here has put out for small businesses. And you see all these public companies going in and getting that money first. Well, they have, dozens of millions of dollars already in the bank, and they're kind of gaming the system. And you're starting to see, or they're laying off a bunch of people, and yet they're still going to pay their big dividend out to their investors. Those are a lot of different things that I think are, laying bare what the actual core of somebody is, and you can only hide that for so long. And this transparency, this is causing a new level of transparency that I think a lot of organizations have gotten away with in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting you mentioned authenticity, because I think authenticity has often been used as a word for I guess, low production values. Recording on your smartphone doesn't necessarily mean authentic. It can, but I think it's become a bit of a catch-all term. What I think is authentic is action, and I think that's what you're seeing played out in the headlines, and that's the most authentic thing there is. The most authentic thing that you can say is just talking about something you've done, or not talking about it, having other people talk about it for you. ideally the people that work for you, because they're proud of the place that they work. And you can't buy that level of authenticity. That has to be through something that you've done. And I think this is actually the opportunity for brands to step up and take action. And if they have these values, I think, we've seen an increase in brands displaying their values very proudly, talking about their values. Now is the time to live those values and show that you actually mean something by them. So you can have, the fact that we're innovative splashed on your site, but are you shifting your business model to, make masks and hand sanitizer? And are you redeploying your people in that way to a greater good, for example? Or are you innovating your business so people can keep jobs, for example? So now's the time where, if you've got these values that are splashed across your walls and all on your career site and you've been talking about, you actually have the chance to live them in a very public forum, and do some good at the same time. So I think this is an opportunity for brands to go big. I think, unfortunately, a lot of brands are, I guess, stuck thinking, I don't know which way to go, and I'm scared to say anything in case I say the wrong thing. And I would just say that, if your intentions are good and if you're trying, that's okay. You don't have to be perfect. I think there is this sort of humility from the strongest leaders at the moment who are going out saying, here's what we're trying to do for our people. We're not getting it right. We have had to furlough some people, but equally we've taken a pay cut ourselves, or we're finding ways around it, or we're trying to find roles. I've seen, even some employers who've had to lay off employees, taking active steps to then offer training to the employees they've had to let go, or put them into re-employment schemes with competitors, things like that. That goes above and beyond what you expect from an employer. And that is a great answer to a bad situation. So I think the brands that are going to emerge on top from an employer brand perspective are ones that get creative, live their values, and actually take some action.
Isn't that funny that, I agree with everything you said. It really resonated with me. And I think the companies that are doing the right things right now are doing all those things that you're talking about. And, we started talking about authenticity, and to your point, coming out and just saying, I don't know what to say, or, hey, I don't know what to do. This is what we think we should do. And here's the thought behind it. It's sort of taking fair process from, a little team element to the whole world and sort of broadcasting that everywhere. And I think, to your point, if there's genuine humility behind it, that authenticity is going to resonate. And the interesting part of all of this is my prediction. So get out your notes and write this down in pen. But I think you're right. We're going to see a separation of companies. We're going to see a separation of organizations who are going to come out of this stronger, and ones that are going to come out of this weaker. And the ones that come out of it stronger, I think, interestingly, are going to be the ones that are able to make investments, not in dollars, but in people, and any like emotional investments, or sort of, you know what I'm saying? Like an authenticity investment, or, it doesn't take a lot of effort to put up a little training program for people that you have to furlough. You know what I'm saying? That's not a big expenditure. That's not like innovating a new social media platform or coming out with a new, smartphone or something like that. But that's going to be a separator, because, to your point, this dissolution between work life, home life, internal, external, all that's kind of going away right now. And I think people are going to remember how they felt, how they were made to feel during this time, and what their organizations did. So it's a really huge opportunity, I think, if people see it. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people are going to be still stuck in those old ways, and they're going to be taking their ROI. I get our ROI, okay? But they're taking their ROI, every single thing. What's my ROI of this announcement, or what's my ROI of this communication? And it ends up leading to a colder response that ultimately is going to be, that's going to be the fingerprint that's left on people.
I think you're right. I think what I would say is, there are a lot of companies that are struggling, and I really empathize with that. I work with a lot of travel brands as well who've taken a big hit, a lot of hospitality brands. But I think at the end of the day, as a leader, as an organization, you have choices to make. And some of those choices are going to suck really, really hard. But I still think there is a way to make tough choices, and to do that with integrity, and to do that in the right way. There are realities that you have to let people go. There are realities that you are going to have to consider your bottom line in order to have a business. At the end of the day, I completely understand and appreciate that. I just think it's the way in which companies act will mean the difference between the employees that remain. Because bear in mind, you let go of 30% of your workforce, you still have the rest of that workforce to keep engaged and motivated when they've just seen all their friends leave. That's a big amount. That's a big amount of levers, and a lot of people left behind feeling scared and lost, and like the company hasn't acted in the right way. So I think you can make decisions that are hard, but I think really, really hard about how you go about those decisions. Has it been transparent? Has it been fair? Were people caught off guard? Did you let them all go in a mass Zoom call? Or, were you honest about the struggles? And did you spend time reassuring the people that were left behind, why you had to do what you had to do, what the next steps are, and I guess what sacrifices you've made as well as leaders? Because if you see your leaders only making sure that their employees take the hit and then they're still paying out bonuses, you've got a problem. I think this does become very, very transparent, and it does become as important how you do what you do as what you are forced to do, I guess.
When we look at companies that are doing it right and doing it wrong, what are I want to talk about some horror stories that you've seen with your sort of employer branding lens. You don't have to name people unless you want to get juicy here. And then who are some other folks, again, name them if you want, who have just totally crushed it and just hit the nail on the head?
Okay, well, I would say a lot of my references, let me see if I can give you two comparisons. I'll give you one which is an example of what I was just talking about, because it was interesting to me. So I saw one of the first stories that came out. I don't know if this hit the US as well, but across Europe, because Sir Richard Branson's quite a big character here, of Virgin fame. There were a lot of headlines about employees basically being asked to take 8 weeks unpaid leave to keep the company afloat in the short term. And the news headlines were incredibly negative because obviously he has a private island and has a lot of personal wealth. This is, very public. So he got really slammed in the press for taking that decision. What I found interesting was about a week later on LinkedIn, he actually posted sort of an open letter talking about the fact that this had been a collective decision, that whether true or not, this had been a discussion with the employees, and they'd all, discussed the different options. Do we have to let people go? Do we have to furlough some people? Or do we all take a collective hit now and, save potentially our colleagues? Which actually is a much more compelling story, whether or not it's true. That is what he wrote.
Yeah.
And I just think that entire narrative could have been handled very differently from a branding perspective. If that was the case, that should have been the story, and you should have been public and transparent about that.
About day one.
Yeah,
You're saying day one. Yeah.
Because rather than let the story be picked up. If that's the authentic truth, that should have been the story from day one, which is, we as a company have taken this decision. This is the process we went through, and this was why this decision was met. And this is what I, Richard Branson, am doing in return.
How hard was that to sort of anticipate that that's what the public response would be?
I think when you're as high profile, I'm surprised they weren't out in front of that story. So I guess from a branding and an employer branding perspective, I thought that was an interesting case study. And I did think if he was willing to go public with the story that it was a collective decision, which if that wasn't true, it would be a very brave move, because in this era of transparency, I would have thought employees would counter that if that wasn't the case. That would have been, an interesting, I guess, case study of collective decision making, which is very interesting from an employer perspective, because often in a crisis situation, it's very top-down leadership, and it's a leadership exec closed doors conversation. The action is taken, move forward. If it was an open conversation with employees and they made a kind of collective sacrifice, I think that speaks very powerfully to their culture and to the fact that everyone's thinking of each other rather than of themselves. So I thought that was an interesting story. I haven't sort of seen the resolution of that one, but I think that would be a good example of, I guess, how to get it wrong and right from a
right.
perspective. I thought the In-N-Out example of giving back funds, was it In-N-Out in the US that gave back their government grant because they
Shake
realized,
Shack, I think.
oh, it was Shake Shack. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm miscrediting In-N-Out. Shame on you.
I don't know that they took it.
No, I thought there was an interesting story just because you mentioned brands taking grants and then obviously realizing that the funds had run out. I think that speaks a lot to collective responsibility. Again, don't know the full details of that story, but I thought it was an interesting headline.
Yeah, that could have been a little bit of hands in the cookie jar, like, oh,
Maybe.
here's that cookie back.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
I didn't see a lot of other brands doing it. So I think it's interesting. If you've received funding, you're fine. I guess you think, right, well, we'll just run and hide and hope no one notices our name among the numbers that took grants they didn't necessarily need. So I think that's very interesting. I think here in the UK, there's been a very interesting, well, I'm not in the UK, I'm actually in Amsterdam, but I have one foot in the UK because I'm a Brit.
Sure. Yeah.
There's been a very interesting case study, which I think will be analysed when this is all over. So I don't know how much you know about our health service, but in the UK, it's been underfunded for a while. The NHS has, obviously been very famous for many years, but now has sort of been struggling, I guess, both in terms of keeping workers, dealing with burnout, and dealing with funding from the government. And as a result of the crisis, NHS workers have been reframed as heroes, much as health workers have been across the world. And I think from an employer brand perspective, there's this super interesting trend of workers who were considered, like delivery workers, etc., considered low skill or considered very transactional employees, becoming suddenly this very heroic profession, this very necessary profession, this profession that you can be super proud to be in. And of course, that should always have been the case. These are people that keep the country running day to day. They're just unsung heroes normally. So I think there's something very powerful in the kind of shifting attitudes of what businesses and what workers are most important in a time of crisis. And I'd be interested to see if that has any shift in the long term, because it's all very well clapping for people and putting up posters in your windows, but I'd be very interested to see if it has a material shift in the way these workers are treated, the benefits they receive, the sort of loyalty and commitment from companies, because a lot of these workers are also gig workers. And I am starting to see some trends in that area, and I guess press driven as much as anything, and negative PR driven as much as anything. But it is shifting the dynamic and the narrative and the sort of sense of value of your employees who are out there doing those frontline roles. So I'd be interested to see if that shifts in terms of the way they're recruited and then cared for once they're an employee.
So let's run down like a little thought experiment of a couple of different paths out of this core that we're at right now. So what do you think those, I don't know, let's talk about 2 or 3 different paths, one bad one, a couple of like middle, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that the thing that people have been talking about a lot, which I found quite interesting, is, does this signal the end for employer branding? Does this actually mean, because there'll be a potential recession, a probable recession, does this signal, I guess, a shift in the balance of the sort of employees market? So it's previously, been touted as a talent market, said, we fought the war for talent and the employer lost. There are a lot of predictions that because of recession, this will shift, and once again, employers will be able to offer very little in return for gainful employment, and will stop having to worry about things like offering more benefits, and will actually be able to be, I guess, more transactional. What I have to offer you in terms of that give-get I was talking about is a job. Take it or leave it. Here are the terms, here's the payment. I think that would be a very unfortunate shift. I'm not sure if I buy into that fully, although I understand why people are predicting that. I feel there'll always be roles that are more in demand and, talent that's more sought after. I think whilst key and frontline workers have been really valuable in the crisis, and hopefully will continue to be valued in that way, I think we have also seen that businesses that are more tech focused and more future focused will be needed in the future, and well, now, yesterday, So I think businesses will rush to digitize. The ones that survive this, that haven't already digitized their processes and become better at remote working and working with tech, will need to rush for that talent to expedite that process, because they'll be behind. And in fact, they are behind if they're not there already. So I don't think we'll see this huge shift, especially in the tech and the digital industries, of that talent being less in demand. So I think employers will still have to work hard. I guess there might be a slight shift, but that would be really unfortunate if the balance has shifted so far that employers feel like they have to try less hard. I would be really disappointed with that, but I can see that in some industries that might be the case. I guess a middle ground would be somewhere between the two, which is, well, I don't know if this is worse actually. I think that you could end up seeing a bit more of a polarization actually, in terms of mass jobs not getting the treatment they deserve, but actually more highly skilled jobs. You might actually see a wider divide in those skill sets. I think it's just based on the fact that I think it tends to be lower income workers in a situation like this, the ones that are struggling or losing jobs or not able to turn up for jobs and don't have that security. I think then if you've got more mass unemployment at that level, it becomes easier for employers to be exploitative at that level. Talent that has been able to work from home, has been able to work remotely, have probably kept their jobs and therefore are still in that secure position where they can pick and choose employers. So you might also see a bit of a polarization again, and an even broader widening of that divide, which would also be an unfortunate outcome of this situation. I guess a good outcome for me would be, I guess if I think about employer branding, that in many cases, employers will see now that this is not a nice to have, that this is front page news, that this is something which is highly connected to your brand from a consumer perspective. So I've been talking for a long time. My background is branding and consumer marketing, obviously. So I've always retained close relationships with that side of things. And I also think we will potentially see those lines being eroded and that conversation being expedited. So it might be the end of, I guess, employer brand as a self-contained field, which would not be, in my opinion, a bad thing, even though it's nice to be an expert in a self-contained field. Actually, I've seen those worlds moving closer together for a while. And I think
general branding, you're saying it could be folded into general branding. Is that what you're saying?
I think if you look at the fact that you have big companies with front page stories, which would be considered PR, positive or negative, with the CEO, being quoted talking about their treatment of their employees, but also what they're doing to protect their customers in the same breath, that's already moved closer together. And that's not always been the case. Those have been separate conversations. You're having an HR conversation over here, you're having a consumer and shareholder conversation over there. I think what we're seeing happening is the collision of those things very quickly and rapidly,
right,
because of this very transparent and open conversation that's being played out. And I think also the willingness now of disgruntled employees to speak out and to feel like they will be heard and they'll be taken seriously if they speak out at scale. And I guess the organization and collective spirit of employees banding together, using all the technology that they've been told to use for work purposes to talk about the fact that 30% of their friends just got laid off, and to mobilize, to talk to the press, to be more open about this and not fear the repercussions, because they're the ones left holding the company together. So I do think there's much more transparency, I guess, a lack of fear in communicating openly. And that has just brought these worlds together very rapidly. And I do think that organizations that are not mobilizing their employer brand, their PR teams, their branding teams, their marketing teams to all work together at the moment will be struggling from a communications perspective, because those things impact each other at the moment.
Yeah, they do impact each other. And I would probably bet that those types of organizations, they can't communicate across these different sort of silos. They probably have a lot of communication issues just out to the employees as well. So those types of organizations are going to be in kind of a tough spot.
Yeah, well, you're also seeing, things in the news in real time at the same time that they're being communicated to employees because of leaks. So, you are basically having to have a much more open and transparent dialogue internally as well as externally, because it's happening whether you like it or not. I'll give you examples I've seen in my feed, in the same breath, grocery delivery companies talking about how their frontline workers are heroes and showcasing them. And in the same breath, those same workers going to the press and saying, we're being told we're heroes, but we're not getting PPE. So we're being treated, we're being used to, front a campaign. But actually the reality is this, and those are appearing in my feed side by side. These
Right.
worlds they've collided already. It's happening.
Yeah. So somebody who's on the outside, again, take off your sort of employer branding hat. What does that dissonance mean to you?
I think there will always be customers that have the luxury of choosing ethically, and those tend to be the customers that are spending more. So I think brands have to take note. I think you can always say there will be people that will use certain services and companies because they're convenient until there's a better option. But as markets open up, as there are more options, and I think this is an interesting time. I think we've talked about, big players. I've heard a lot about big players being the most stable players and being able to ride the storm. But I also think if you're a savvy challenger brand, this isn't the worst time to come up from behind. If you are well set up for remote working, you can move faster than a lot of these big companies that are sort of oil tankers. You can shift your business model, you can be more innovative, and you can change a lot quicker. So I think we will see some competitors in the marketplace. And I mean, even on a small scale, I've been making choices. Do I support and buy from my supermarket's online delivery, which actually has a waiting list, of about a month at the moment? Or, I've seen locals set up where, restaurants are doing takeaway and delivery and they're posting on Instagram and you can WhatsApp them to order. So I do think there are smaller businesses that are moving quicker, able to be more innovative. There are local farmers markets that have got online that weren't online a month ago. So I think businesses do have to watch their backs. And I do think that I hope another positive change will be that people do choose to support local, do see that their local partners are struggling and do choose more ethically. And that will include, seeing how a company treats their people.
So let's talk about somebody who's in an HR role, in an employer branding role, in one of these quote unquote cost centers. I mean, the whole point of this podcast is really to help elevate people who are in these roles to try to break out of this what I call backward thinking, this backward cost center mentality, and to be those strategic levers. Just because there's not a direct ROI between the money I spend here and the return I get here, just like there's not a direct ROI for the extra hour of sleep I get or the extra hour of the time I spend at the gym to my performance at work or my mental clarity as I have meetings or whatever. We know that doing those good things end up generating those good results, even if I can't draw that direct line between them. A lot of folks who you talk to, who your clients are, who my clients are in these roles. And many times they're working for people who are maybe from a different generation or have a different mentality, who have that just sort of strict ROI. Every dollar I put into this machine must generate $1.50. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about? So, how do we help these people with actionable steps right now to elevate out and to help change some of that thinking at the top?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And look, I've been on both sides of the fence here, so I feel their pain. I guess just to give a bit of a personal perspective on this, when I went to work in a corporate environment, I'd never been in that environment before. So I guess I broke a lot of the rules through not understanding what the rules were. So I'd highly recommend a little bit of naivety. But I really struggled with the fact that this was a vertical. and that it was a vertical that was focused on talent attraction, even though everything we did was seen internally, and everything the company did would then impact whatever message we were trying to put out. So it is one of those roles where I think this is a quote from James Ellis from a podcast I listened to the other day, but I really liked it. You carry the company on your shoulders, but actually you're not accountable for all of their decisions and everything that they do. So
Right.
it's a really hard role. I think it's a little bit time to be brave, because if you can't be brave in a time where everyone's flailing and no one knows exactly what to do, then you're never going to be brave in a business as usual time. So I do think this is a chance to rip up the rule books and think outside the proverbial box. And I kind of feel like if not now, then when? And the way I used to go about it was build a case. So put together a hypothesis, say, based on all of this evidence that I've seen out there from what other brands are doing, or what people have done in past recessions, or how people have weathered certain crises and come out on top. Here is a hypothesis for something we should do. Then shop it around quietly, build some momentum for it, build some allies is what I would do in a big organization, and go to people that have influence in different areas that you can't influence. So go to different departments, to people that you think have influence, make some allies, show how this could benefit them, and try to work together across silos, because this is the only way that we're going to win at this time, because it's not business as usual. Your strategy can't be, month on month incremental results. There have to be some big, brave steps taken, and you have to be reactive and you have to be quick. And you can't be quick operating in a silo. So you have to form those horizontal allies. You have to find people who support your plan, show them the evidence, show them how this is going to support their ROI and their goals, their KPIs, and then come up with a joint plan and present it upwards and say, actually, I've already spoken to all these people. They agree, they're willing to help. This is how it's going to happen. And then take it upwards. Don't take a pipe dream upwards, but move quick, build allies, build a case, use any evidence and data available to you to show that your hypothesis has merit, and then say, here's our expected result, and here's our worst case scenario as well. Show that you planned for the worst case, because ultimately there will always be a naysayer in the room, especially if you are working with different generations of people that aren't used to working at this pace and in this way. They will say, oh, well, what if people have negative comments on what we do, or what if they think this about us? Have the responses drafted, and then just be brave, put yourself out there. And I do believe, I think I wrote this in a post the other week, I do believe that in extraordinary times, solutions can come from anywhere, and they should and do. So I think who better than people who are in the HR team, who are in these spaces where they're thinking about people and processes all day, to understand how to do it. The unique angle that I think employer brand has is they spend a lot of time looking externally, whereas I think in general HR teams, but especially now, are head down just trying to crisis manage, and they're inward looking, because, and rightly so, because they're trying to support all the people in their organization. Where employer brand have the advantage is they spend a lot of time looking externally. They're looking at what brand stories are out there about what other people's teams are doing, and that's the luxury that they have. So I think if you're an employer brand team that's been told to down tools, and they've said, okay, we're not doing talent attraction, so we're just going to stay silent, you have all this insight. You can do more, and now is the time to put your hands up if you can, if you have the energy and the mental health and the strength, and you're not looking after 7 children and just trying to make your rent. If you have the bandwidth, now's the time to be brave and put yourself out there. And I would want to work for a company that is willing to listen to ideas from anywhere. And if they're not, maybe they're not the right company for you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I love the way you put that. Like, this thing is the great leveler, right? We're all susceptible to this thing. We're all, the fears that we all have of poverty and death are sort of front and center for all of us. That's a great leveler. And it's an opportunity now, as business models are being rewritten and as plans are being scrapped and reformed, for people in these cost centers to really pop their head up and make the case, to your point, that, hey, we are an underutilized tool, and we're somebody who can make a huge strategic difference in our organizations right now. And here, you just gave some really great actionable steps to help that elevation actually occur. So I love it. It is the time to be brave. We all have the opportunity to be leaders right now. everybody at every level of the organization, you know, all their plans for the year are scrapped and they don't know how close we are to shore. You know, we're kind of sailing through this fog.
Mhm.
And now's the time to jump up and make something happen. And I love what you said, how, you know, play dumb, or, you know, you said like lean into your naivety, or just play stupid.
Yeah.
Okay, well, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to reach out to the CEO directly. Push the ideas out there, get them out there, because everyone's looking for the right idea. And it's usually going to be something simple. It's usually going to be something that's more toward authenticity and less toward the PR spin. And
Mm.
it's going to be something that's going to really put people first. I think that's what, if you can have a long-term view, you know, fingers crossed, if you can have a long-term view, that's what's going to pay off in the end.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think obviously bear in mind your CEO is probably dealing with some pretty big problems, but if what you're proposing is a solution, and a solution to an element of the business that they might not be actively thinking about as much
Right.
as the bottom line, is, you know, a chance for a good news story while also helping to engage a very demotivated workforce. That's only going to help and support. It's only going to help and support your leadership. I just think, you know, there's a right way to go about it. This is not about your chance for glory,
Totally.
but it is about your chance to do more than, I guess, the box that you've been put in, and to show what real value employer branding brings to an organization.
And I think in this state of sort of like elevated emotional, you know, feelings that everybody has, like that, you know, that famous quote that people won't always remember what you do, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. That
Yeah,
also works on leadership, right? So
yeah,
if leadership sees someone who they thought is in a check the box function, or they thought is in a cost center function, sticking their head out with some really good strategic thoughts, and hey, I have your back, and hey, here's a blind spot, and here's a curve I'm helping you see around,
mm.
whether they act on it or not, they're not going to forget that feeling.
Well, I think as well, everyone wants something of their leadership at the moment. So everyone's
Right.
now put leadership into, I guess, a sort of parental role, again, because of the situation and because they have to. But I don't think there are that many people who are actively thinking, okay, what can I do to support my leadership through this insane time? I think most people are, you know, it's human instinct to go into a self-preservation mode. Like, how am I going to be looked after? How is my role secure? Am I going to still get that promotion I've been on track for? What about my bonus? You know, am I still getting paid? All of those protectionist instincts are very natural, but they aren't necessarily for the greater good.
Right.
So thinking about what you can do for your colleagues, for your leadership, for your company, and what you can do to add value at this point where, hell, we all need a little added value, is not the worst thing you can be doing. And I guess speaks to your longer term loyalty and value that you can offer. And offering value in a time of crisis will make you indispensable in a, you know, business as usual time.
That's a great point. So how can people find you?
LinkedIn's probably the best way at the moment. So I'm Emily Firth on LinkedIn. I am working on my, I'm using my downtime, which I don't actually have that much, to work on my own brand and site. But for now, I'm on LinkedIn and I write there a lot. So you can read what I've written on there as well. I always like talking to people. So yeah, give me a shout, ask me questions. I also answer questions quite a lot via LinkedIn. So if you want to write me a question about something you have, I will try to find the time to write a proper answer for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Ethics Experts. This was really a lot of fun, and I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did too.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Nick. It was great chatting to you.